video, we'll be looking at how we can complete an analysis of our data. I will be demonstrating what you'll need to do. However, I'll be using the enrolled credit hours, and in the assignment, you're asked to do the same thing on the age data. So make sure you make that note. You won't do the columns that I'm doing, you'll do those that correspond to the age data. While we're talking about that, let's just take a quick look at what we have in the spreadsheet that you'll receive. I have 4 tabs that are arranged at the bottom for you. The first one is where you will complete your age analysis, and you can see that it says age analysis here. We'll prepare a histogram from our credit data, and I don't have that there, but we'll do that in this video so that you can go back and look at that. And then also I'm going to do the analysis, the same analysis that you need to complete on the enrolled credit hours. And so I'll complete that on this spreadsheet. And then finally, there's a fourth spreadsheet if for whatever reason the video goes too fast and you're not able to see exactly what I've typed, you can see the formulas that I've used. Now remember, these formulas reference cells. So for instance, when I calculated the mean, I was doing it from C2 to C904. Well, in column C is again where I have that enrolled credit hour data. You wouldn't do it for C2 because you're completing your analysis on the age data. So you would need to look at B2 to B904 or whatever the last entry is on your particular spreadsheet. Okay, so let's get started. And again, I'm demonstrating on credit hours, and you need to do this on the age variable, which is located in column B. The first thing we need to do is find the maximum value of our data in our data. And so I'm going to click in the box next to the label that says max, and I'm going to use equals max, and I'll start with my left parenthesis, and I can actually just click on the column label for column C, and it'll select everything in column C. We'll close parenthesis, and we find our maximum value is 20. I'll repeat the same thing for finding the minimum value, except I'll use equals min, and again click on column C, and that gives us the minimum value. So far we know that the students in our survey were enrolled in between 2 and 20 credit hours. The next thing I need to do is find the mean or the average, and I'm going to use equals average and my left parenthesis, of course. And again, we can click on column C. Let's see if that'll work for us. Okay, it works fine. All right, so the average is 9.54 credit hours. The median for this data, we can find it very quickly as well, just by typing equals median, left parenthesis, click on column C, and then our right parenthesis, and it gives us a median value. And also the mode, equals mode. All right, so the most common value for our students is 6 credit hours. All right, the next thing I want to look at is the standard deviation, which you should know measures the spread of our data. The mean, median, and mode are measures of the center of our data. And so they give us some idea about what the typical values might be. But the standard deviation measures consistency or spread. So we're going to do equals, and the function is STDEV. Okay, and then left parenthesis, and we'll click on column C, and we get a standard deviation of 3.80. Now the range, of course, is simply the difference between the maximum and the minimum values. We've already found the max and minimum values above, so I'm going to use those values to compute the range. To do this, I'm going to start with an equal sign, and then I'm going to click on the cell where the maximum value is located, and I'll subtract by typing the minus sign, and then click on the minimum value and hit enter. So we don't have to actually enter the values, we just enter the location of those values by clicking on where the values are located. That way, if for whatever reason we were to change something, let's say if I change credit hours, or I find out that I had an error, instead of this being 3 credit hours, it should have been 30 credit hours, then that updates everything. It updated the maximum value and it also updated my range. Okay, so by using those locations instead of the actual values, it can save us some work if we've made an error or we need to make changes in our calculations. Now we want to count the number of values or number of students that we have, and we can just start by typing equals count, our parenthesis. Okay, and then it tells us what to enter. We need to actually highlight the values that it wants us to count. So we'll just start with the first value. I did not include the header, and I'm just going to drag down until I get to the last value. Use my right parenthesis, enter, and we find that in this data set we have 1,304 students. Now I want to go back to another step and actually verify the mode. The mode, again, is the value that occurs most often. So we want to count how many times each of our values occurs. Over here, I've already listed, looks like most of the values that we had for credit hours. I'm going to extend this a little bit farther, since we had credit hours going from 2 to 20. And to count how many students had 2 credit hours, how many had 3, how many had 4, etc., we're going to use a function called count if. So I'll type equals count if. I'll use my left parenthesis, and then I'm going to highlight the range that I want it to count. Then I can again click on column C, followed by a comma. Then we have to tell it what the criteria is. I want it to count the values in this range if they are equal to what. And I'm just going to click on the 2 and then my right parenthesis. All right, so it says that I have one student who is enrolled in 2 credit hours. And to copy this, I can use the fill handle, which we've talked about in other videos. I'm going to click, hold, and drag down to the cell that's next to 20 credit hours, and then of course release. And so let's just look at what that does. We're still doing count if. It's still in column C, but the criteria is now in cell J5. So we're counting how many 3s or 3 credit hours occurred. And then in this next one, and so when we drag the formula down, we're still looking at column C, but the criteria came down one row to cell J6. And so we didn't have to type that all the way down. It used that relative reference to copy the formula so that it worked for all of these credit hours along the way. All right, and what our goal here again was to verify that the mode really was 6. And so when I look through my frequencies, I can see that the highest frequency is for a credit hour enrollment of 6 hours. And I'm just going to highlight that so that it stands out on my spreadsheet. So on the Home tab, I'm clicking on the paint bucket and choose your favorite color to highlight it. And there it is. Okay, we also need to count the number of males and females. So we're going to click on click in the box next to the female label. I'm going to use count if again. So equals count if. The range will be column A, followed by a comma. And this works differently sometimes. I can't quite figure out the rhyme or reason, but I'm going to click on the box that contains the text female. And then, of course, we'll close that with the right parenthesis and hit enter. It worked out fine. Um, and of course, the only thing we need to do to count the number of males is actually drag this down. I'm going to show you another way, though, that we could do it in case clicking on the cell didn't really work for you. We're going to do equals count if, and I'm going to click on my range, which is column A, followed by a comma. And this time I'm going to type in quotations the text that I want it to count. And it needs to be exactly the same. So if you have capital M for male, then inside the quotation marks, we need to include capital M and then close with the right parenthesis. And so that works as well. So if just clicking on the cell doesn't get it for you, then you might need to actually type your text in quotation marks to get what you need. Okay, so the first thing we need to do to get our classes established is to find the class width. We're going to use for the enrolled credit hours data 7 classes. For the age data, which you'll be doing, you need to follow the instructions in the document that'll tell you what you need to do. But for us, we're going to use 7 classes. And so I get my class width by typing equals, and I'm going to type round up. Okay, of course, we know when we're calculating the class width, we always want to round up. And then the calculation for the class width, I need another left parenthesis. I'm going to do my maximum value minus the minimum value. And I'm going to put a right parenthesis on that. And then we're going to divide by 7, because 7 is the number of classes. I'm going to follow that with a comma. I'm going to follow that with a 0 and then a right parenthesis. And when I hit enter, we get a class width of 3. All right, so my first lower class limit is going to be 0. I chose something that was either the minimum value or something slightly less than that. My first lower class limit then is 0. To get the next lower class limit, I'm going to add the class width. To do this, I'm going to type equals. I'm going to click on that previous lower class limit, and I'm going to add, and I'm going to click on my class width and hit enter. So what it did was, to get this lower class limit, it added the first lower class limit to the class width. To get the second lower class limit or the third lower class limit, I should do the same thing. And we can, of course, kind of do that by dragging if we anchor our class width. If I drag this without anchoring it, then when I go down to this next cell, it's going to move to this cell to look for my class width. And I want it to always look right here when it gets ready to add that class width. So I'm going to edit what I have here in cell F20. I just double clicked on it, and I'm going to put a string or a $ in front of that 16 and hit enter. Now when I drag that down, it'll always go back to G16 to get the class width. Okay, so of course we want to make sure we've got 7 classes. I think we need just one more, so I'll just drag it down one more time. And then we can think about our upper class limits. If my first lower class limit starts at 0, and then the next lower class limit starts at 3, this upper class limit must end at 2. So I'm going to type a 2 there. And then to get the other upper class limits, I just want to add that class width. So I'm going to type again equals. I'm going to click on the cell where 2 is located, that first upper class limit, and then plus, and I'm going to click on where my class width is located, and then I'll go ahead and put that string in there in front of 16. So it'll always look at G16 to get the class width. And so I get a second upper class limit of 5. I'm going to drag that down, and then that takes care of all of it. So just looking at the class limits, we want to make sure that all of our data can be included in one of these classes. Since our minimum value was 2 and our maximum value is 20, we've got a place for each of our data values to go. To get the histogram, we're going to go to the Data tab, and we're going to go over to Data Analysis. And one of the options there is histogram. We're going to choose that. And so the dialog here asks us for the input range, and I'm going to choose column C because I'm still looking at my credit hour data. And then it asks us for the bin range. The bins in Excel are upper class limits. So I'm going to click in the box where they want the bin range, and I can just actually highlight on the spreadsheet those upper class limits, and it'll paste their locations in for bin range. Because I did my input using the entire column C, I do need to let it know that I have labels for my data, and then I want it to chart my data on a new sheet. And we'll click OK. All right, now I can see I have my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I've got my 7 classes. Now, of course, a chart or a graph should be able to stand on its own at any point in time. So we need to make some edits to this graph. First of all, I'm going to make it a little bit larger. The second thing I want to do is to give it an appropriate title. And so histogram of credit hours of MTC students. I should say enrolled credit hours. All right, I need to make sure that my axes have an appropriate label. Frequency is good here. Upper class limit is ambiguous. We want to put something more descriptive and explaining what our data is. So we'll say credit hours. All right, and if we want to make this a little fancy, we might be able to choose one of these templates. Whatever you'd like to do in that regards. I'll choose this one that has a little bit of a shadow. Okay, just make sure we have a title and we've got our axes labeled. And I do like that it's actually shown the frequency for each of the bars. Okay, now a couple of things that we need to change. First of all, with the histogram, we never have gaps between our bars. So we need to get rid of those gaps. I'm going to right click on one of our bars, and I'm going to choose to format the data series. And over here, it gives me a gap width of 41%. I actually want that to be 0. All right, and so you can see now there are no gaps between our bars. Okay. The next thing we want to do is to get rid of this more column. That's something that Excel does, but really we don't need that for our histogram. So I'm going to click on my picture, my histogram, And I'm going to select Chart Tools if that's not already selected for you. And then here we want to select our data. All right, so we'll click on Select Data, and we like 2, 5, 8, 11, 14, 17, 20. I don't want this more value, so I'm going to deselect it and then click OK. And so now that extra space is gone. We didn't need that for our histogram. Of course, one of the things you'll do, and you can do this either in a cell here in Excel, you'll type something um, about the distribution of our data, what we found about our data. For instance, you might say that most of our students are taking about 8 credit hours, followed very closely by 14 credit hours. Okay, that's a descriptive statement about what we're seeing in our data. We have very few students who are taking more than about 14 credit hours. Most of our students stay below the true um, full load, which is about 18 credit hours. So there are all kinds of descriptive statements that we can look at or make based on what we see here in our histogram. All right, the last thing you need to do for the analysis is to prepare a stem and leaf plot. And I'm asking you to do that just for the first 25 males and the first 25 females in our data set. And I've highlighted those in pink for you. So you got 25 female students and their ages highlighted. And then if you scroll down to the male section, you'll see highlighted 25 males. And that's the only thing you have to use for the stem and leaf plot. For every other part or every other calculation, I want you to use all of the data. And so I'll just give you an idea of how this would work. We're going to use basically a back-to-back stem and leaf plot, and that means we'll put the stems in the center. We've got students again. Well, you'll have to look to determine what the age range is, but we'll say we may have students who are in their teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, maybe even more. And of course, if I have a student who is age 31, and this is a female student, then I'm going to type a 1, okay, on the row that has the stem of 3. So this would be 31. And then there's someone who's 39. And then someone who is 22. So I'll type 1, 2. And then I actually have 1, 2, 3, 4 students, or 4 more students who are 22. So I'll type 4 more 2s. Okay. Um, Sometimes we'll have someone who is 40 years of age. How would I do that? Well, if you type a 0, if we add something to that 0, like for instance, if we find we have a 41-year-old, then that 0 is going to go away. So the way we can keep the 0 there is to start your line there with a single quote mark or a single tick mark, and then put the 0 and the 1 if you need a 0, and then hit enter. And that way it looks at this as text and not as a number. And of course, we want it to be lined up with the other values. So I'll click on this, and I'm going to have it be right justified. And so it looks just like everything else. There's no need to put commas between your values. When we do a stem and leaf plot, we don't use commas. And so the only trick here might be using the zeros or including that 0. And to do that again, I typed a single tick mark in front of the values that I wanted to enter so that 0 would appear along with all of the other numbers. I hope this helps. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks.